Thank you so much for helping me out today. Appreciate it. So a couple questions. How long have you been a teacher?
17 years.
Oh my gosh.
I started at San Lorenzo in my old, actually, high school district, and I taught ninth graders to 10th graders there. Physical, like science as well as life science. And then my next year teaching, I was hired here. So I've been here ever since.
You've been here 16 years.
Yeah,
Okay,
doing
great.
initial like
And
1
mainly
year.
life science here?
Mainly life science. I did a year of my physical science, but I'm credentialed in life science, and I love that way more.
Okay. And then what's your current schedule and assignment here?
So for this year, I have 2 sections of Living Earth and 3 sections of AP Environmental Science.
Okay. And then the Living Earth, are they just standard sections? Are they in the SHAPE Academy or?
So my first period is a SHAPE Living Earth, and then the other one is just college prep.
Okay, great. So one of the questions that they've asked me to ask about is your prior experiences either with coaching or evaluation, like how they've been, like what have they been like, have there been different experiences with different people? Can you just talk in general about how coaching and or evaluation has been over the course of your career?
So my real experiences with coaching, I think, started very recently with NGSS, with Carrie Ware. When she became an instructional coach, somehow we managed to connect, and it was more of a peer discussion, kind of ideas going back and forth, and her providing great insights about what we can be doing, what the vision of NGSS looks like, as well as the details. And as far as evaluations, the only evaluations I've been through are with admin. They've thankfully been good. Nothing too serious.
Like the evaluations have been good, or the
evaluations have been good. The process is very sort of cut and dry.
Mm-hmm.
They come in, they watch. We have a meeting, I sign papers, and then that's pretty much it.
Okay.
I think there's just way too much on their plate for them to do anything more extensive than that. As also on the other flip side of coaching, I've been a induction mentor now for a little bit, so I get to go observe and have fun with new teachers with their starry eyes and engage in that kind of wonderful energy level that they have.
Are you in that role this year?
I am in that role.
And how many people are you
2
supporting?
people this year.
How long have you been doing the induction mentor?
Probably like 3 years now.
That's great. Thank you. Being that you've been here 16 years and probably been through at least 8 of the formal cycles, you know that Fremont bases their evaluation off the CSTPs. And so for this coaching, which I think is a little weird because coaching isn't just in the CSTPs, it's in all kinds of things, whether it's learning a new curriculum or thinking about how to organize relationships or any of those. They don't always fall in the CSTPs. What's your familiarity and use of CSTPs, and maybe how do you use them with your mentees?
So I understand you in CSTPs, there's 6 standards, and they all they range from engaging students all the way to developing as an educator itself, planning instruction, assessing students, safe environments, and each of those has their own elements, pieces to it that can be a whole storyline of itself. So I don't, as like a 16th year teacher, I don't look at those every day anymore. They're sort of now are always in the background of planning lessons, and they just sort of automatically come up. But when I engage with my induction teachers, they are working on a set of teaching standards, and they have ILPs that they're working on in terms of a goal that they've set within that standard, and they've placed themselves somewhere in a continuum for that standard. So when I go in for an observation, I am looking at what they want me to look at, what they've told me, what they'd like me to look at, as well as how they're running their classroom in terms of meeting their long-term goals.
What like for your mentees, is there any common pattern, like that newer teachers seem to be more focused on certain areas of the CSTPs, or is it pretty well distributed, or where do you find yourself offering the most help and support?
Most of them need to know about organizing subject matter and planning instruction. They're usually come kind of without many resources. So most of them are interested in how do I go to my next lesson? What is my next lesson? What is that kind of thing. And a few of them will really want to know how to get to know their students better, how to engage their students based on their interests.
Something you're really good at, from what I've seen.
Thank you.
Great, yeah.
So it varies from teacher to teacher, but mostly it's about what am I going to do next week.
Fantastic. So I'm going to observe your third period class.
Yes.
Thanks for inviting me in to do that. What can you tell me about the class? Like, tell me about the students, the group. Is it mostly sophomores, freshmen? Just in general, can you describe who's in here?
We have generally sophomores in the Living Earth class. I do have 3 seniors in that class. It's overall sort of a quiet class. They're opposite of my first period class. And I sort of appreciate that, but I would really like them to be a little bit more energetic, a little bit more involved. They are very cooperative. They're sweet, they're cooperative, but they're not super collaborative.
Okay.
They are kind of more introverted as individuals. I have several kids who have 504s or IEPs, and they range from eating disorders to autism. There's a student who barely speaks or speaks so quietly that it's really difficult to hear her. There's another student who has a lot of difficulty interacting with other students, can usually only see things from his perspective. And then there is just various kinds of learning issues, more processing deficits, and there is just one designated English language kid, but I'm not really worried about that as much as she's also has a processing issue that's more, I think, is challenging than the English.
How many students total are in this section?
32.
32. Wow, so it's a full room.
It is full room, but
range.
there is one student who is on home hospital right now. So, yeah.
So from our prior discussions, I know that your work on NGSS, you really value the academic discourse and students, talking and sense making. And it sounds like this class being quiet might present some challenges. So what are some things you've tried with them already?
Biggest challenge. So we try to have a little bit of fun to loosen them up. We do like brain breaks. Again, they're all kind of shyer than my first pair. My first pair is just like, it's hard to get them back from brain break. But these guys are hard to move into a brain break. But then the other is just constantly posing teen talk questions and having them use some sort of strategy. For example, this time I'll have them provide a sentence to them, and I'll have them provide a group sentence or two about something that they saw during the activity. And like maybe one individual will share that out or put that up on our poster. So it's using some sort of like accountability method, unfortunately, to get them to talk. Whereas I'd like to just be like, all right, it's time to chat, and they break into discussion, but that hasn't happened.
So they're motivated by like, I need to do this task.
Yes. Okay. It's like, okay, and the task may not be worth anything, but at least you have to give me something, and so then they'll kind of grudgingly do it.
Interesting. Interesting to have a whole class of kids like that. So third period will be a block period, right? So it's like
about an hour and a half.
An hour and a half. And so tell me about what's going to be going on today.
So today is, again, a lesson that is, I think, kind of a biggie because we're doing genetics. When we used to do genetics, we just sort of told kids that this is how traits get inherited, and these are the terms associated with it. Now here's a Punnett square. Show me how this works. But now we're trying to get them to ask their own questions about the relationships between traits and DNA and chromosomes. And then more importantly, look for patterns of inheritance. And then once they've discovered some of those patterns, using that foundation to teach those bigger concepts and key terms that help us discuss the patterns. Or understand Mendelian genetics and understand the chromosome theory of inheritance. So today they're going to be using genetic tool pedigrees on some fictional families to, again, discover patterns.
Okay.
I've already laid the groundwork for them.
Is it kind of like a mystery, or?
It is not exactly a mystery. It's more like a what a genetic counselor might do.
Okay.
So they have family background, they have some of the family members' information, and they have to sort of piece together kind of a family tree, but it's more of a genetic tool because you're looking at one particular trait. And then hopefully they'll discover that some traits skip generations, some traits are more common, some traits are rare, some traits are only in one sex, and those directly translate in some specific Mendelian patterns of inheritance that we would have just given like notes on before.
Okay.
And they also translate into chromosomal theory of inheritance.
Okay. Is this a lesson that you developed, or
No,
is it something
it's
you found
actually
somewhere, or-
someone shared it with me a while back that they saw in a conference they went to. So I think it was model-based biology, something like that. So I borrowed pieces of it. It's not purely that lesson, so I borrowed some pieces and I did some work prior with them, and then we're going kind of somewhere else. So I've taken the resource of the family pedigree, the family background information that was already done.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So what have they been doing to lead up to this so far?
Leading up to this, they've been asking questions about, well, we started with our basic unit phenomena of a family with 2 children born with a very rare disease. And this family, I'm hoping that also eventually segues into our evolution, because this family has this particular trait because of a genetic bottleneck that occurred in their population. So that feeds kind of right into evolution later. But that was our fundamental phenomena. But then we've also have this little mini phenomena of like fraternal twins who look super different. And how is it that 2 parents, sets of DNAs, how do they work in the offspring? Why do some traits come up and some traits don't? So that's the phenomena that they're eventually, going to circle back to.
That's interesting. So, kind of to summarize, you're hoping today that they'll deepen their understanding of how traits are passed down, understand more about chromosomes, and be able to kind of describe this Mendelian effect?
Yeah, sort of. Yeah, basically, we're using the cross-cutting concept of patterns.
Okay.
And that's like a bigger goal. I understand that there are patterns that emerge in science. And then using that now that they've been sort of primed, that these are the patterns that they're seeing over and over again, when we attach to scientific concepts like the law of dominance, the law of segregation, of independent assortment, which is very, when you look at them, just purely scientifically speaking, they have a platform to build the rest of that on. So it's foundational, but it's also, those learnings kind of fit really well into like how traits are inherited and how what traits pop up and how that's determined in the offspring.
Great. So, thinking of the lesson that's coming up and the CSTPs and, me being here to help act as a mirror, what can I look for today? What would be useful for you to have an extra set of eyes just to see what's going on, or what kind of questions do you have about how your students are working together, or how the lesson's going, or what they're learning? What CSTP catches your attention, and what should I be paying attention to for you today?
There are actually several things that I've been thinking about.
Okay.
I think one is that when they do group work like this, there's some kids that are go-getters that just boom, involved. And even with the work I've been doing with them, like make sure you're inviting your whole team to contribute, take the risk to contribute, work cooperatively, and communicate effectively. There are still kids who just sort of hang back. And I'd love to see, like, how is it that when I'm, working with so many groups, how can we ensure that those kids hanging back aren't just, kind of straightening up only because I walked by.
Okay.
The other thing is with, NGSS, I'm still working on how is it that I plan instruction that makes sense and sort of tells a logical story for kids, and making sure that I'm leaving inquiry, but I'm also coming back around and helping to bridge those gaps, and making sure that they're not all just trying to discover it on their own, right? Because they don't have to do that. And it's really difficult to understand what they know if I just leave it up to pure discovery.
Right.
So am I coordinating instructions so that it flows logically, it makes sense, and that we all get to some big ideas together? And lastly, is this of interest to kids? Like, are they engaging because they are interested? To me, I pulled up like, oh, that's so cool, but putting myself back in their shoes, the phenomena that we looked at, they kind of were like, whoa, they kind of sat up thinking, this first one's incredibly sad, and the second was just like, whoa, really? So this other little activities we're doing to go back to the phenomena, are they still keeping their interest, and are they still being engaged?
Okay, so it sounds like two things that can help look for. One is the CSTP one on engaging students, and then the other CSTP about kind of how the learning experience is organized. Is that?
Yeah, that sounds
okay.
great.
So I'm thinking a couple things I can do during the lesson to help look for that is I can kind of draw out a map of how kids are engaging in teams, and watch for what teams are doing when your eyes aren't on them, and if their behavior changes, when you turn, and I can just report back to you like what I observed for that. I can also listen in teams for language that they're using that's inviting or excluding, and I might pull a couple of kids aside and just ask them some questions about how their experience with group work is. And I think maybe I'll do the same thing with the question of like, is this engaging to them? Like I'll look for it and I'll see to what degree they're leaning in or leaning back. But I also might pull a couple of kids aside and just say, is this, like, what do you think about this topic? What's interesting about it? How's it going? And then we can talk about that later.
Okay, that sounds good. Yeah, this is one of those units where I'm willing to still scrap and rebuild, right? Based on again, that engagement portion.
Have you done this one before in prior years?
This one, no.
Okay. How did it go first period?
First period was good. I mean, the shape kids were really into it, and I was so happy because I had kids who usually don't take ownership that were in there, drawing drawing the squares and disagreeing with them, and providing new information. So either it is in the health careers kind of academy, so maybe this really speaks to them. It's usually a little bit different with third period.
Okay, that'll be interesting to see.
It's May, and I still haven't found what speaks to that.
You'd also mentioned the NGSS challenge of giving kids space to figure things out on their own, but also making sure they have enough information that they can develop understanding, and trying to balance how much work they do compared to how much work you do to explain. What could I help look for related to that?
I guess when we come back as a class after the activity, I'm going to give a little bit more information, but we're not at even explaining portion yet. I'm going to actually give them a little bit more data, actually just a little bit more intro. We haven't spoken about Mendel yet at all. So I'm going to show them a little funny video on Mendel, and then introduce them to his experiments, and then provide them with that data. And eventually, once we've looked at that data, then I'm probably going to start using more of the scientific terminology, and go over actually explaining those concepts using all the examples that we've played with.
And that happens today?
No.
Okay, that happens later.
That happens probably Friday.
It sounded like a lot.
No,
So
that's
to
not
do it in one
happening
day.
today. Probably today. I think they're going to be a little bit brain dead after this pedigree building, after looking at other patterns, after doing one or two more things after watching the video. I think what I'm going to do is then give them personal time to go back to something or go forward. So have got 3 different kinds of handouts that they get to choose whether they're still not great with genes, chromosomes, DNA, they can grab that. If they're wanting to practice some of the protein synthesis we've already done, which is a little complicated, or if they want to forge ahead, I've got some of those concepts to work with.
Maybe I'll ask the kids why they chose whichever of
Yeah.
those paths. Like, how did they make that choice?
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, because I don't want it's just too much me time. It's just yeah.
In the end, how will you know if the kids know the things that you want them to know?
How do we ever? Well, a couple of I think different ways. So I think partly based on what they choose, for give me an idea where they are. I've also have some a little bit more independent practice based on the pedigrees and patterns. So, actually, I'll grab it later. So they practice this stuff, building these pedigrees and looking for those patterns. We're going to go back to our phenomena, the Nez family.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm going to give them the sort of the same background and ask them to create that pedigree, but then tell me, using the evidence from their pedigree, what actually kind of inheritance pattern, by using the concept and using the terminology that they see here. So I'm thinking if they're able to do that, and if they're able to build in the ideas of probability and recessive dominance, genes, autosomes, all those vocab that I'll kind of give them as a list to use in their explanations. So I can build that model and use that model as evidence to explain.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I feel like is my...
When you first introduced the Nez family, did you have them kind of try to talk about and figure out what was going on and explain it at that time? And so you have some initial understanding from the students, and now you would see hopefully a bunch of growth. Is that kind of the path?
Hopefully. So the C-Think posters over there, those are based on those initial ideas about the Nez family, about DNA, about genes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.